This is week 9, I believe, of the micro course, and you're getting close to the end. So you guys need to be on top of things and make sure you're getting ready for the final project, which is due next week, so in 2 weeks. So make sure you complete that on time. And again, if you have any questions about it when you're working on it, just let me know. The requirements are posted. You go to week 10, but I'll mention that in the video next week. But this week we cover an important chapter, and it's a chapter about externalities and public goods. Now, when we covered markets, we said how markets are efficient, supply, demand, blah, 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 competition, producers, consumers, and all that stuff. But then we saw monopolies, and when monopolies arise, something is not there, meaning competition between suppliers, and so you get a market failure. You get a situation in which the outcome is not what you want it to be because one producer can dictate the prices. In this case, we look at externalities. Externalities are external effects, as the name says. So, for example, let's make a simple example. Let's say, smoking. People make cigarettes, people buy cigarettes, smoke, but there is a problem with that. And the problem is that people that do not smoke can still get negative effects. And that's called secondhand smoking. Okay, so if you work, you never smoked, never made a cigarette, never bought a cigarette, never used a cigarette, but you work in a place where everybody else smokes and you are in a closed environment for many hours a day with other people smoking, you might still get the negative effects. You might have lung cancer just because other people around you smoked. And that's called an externality, external effect. Obviously, that's a negative externality. So the problem there is what to do about that. Who should pay for the fact that you got cancer from somebody else's smoking? Okay, it's a big deal. It's a big deal because it's a big issue. And so this chapter addresses that. And when you go to whatever that's called, the thing, Blackboard, when you go here, you will see again all the announcements, and then you go to coursework. And coursework, you scroll down to week 9. And week 9, you will see that we cover externalities, property rights, and the environment. And basically, this chapter talks about these things. It talks about what are these externalities, what has to do with the environment, because mostly are environmental problems that come with that, because pollution is the biggest problem, and how sometimes property rights might or might not solve the situation, and then when the government can intervene to solve the situation. So in this case, let's look a little bit. If you go and click on the PowerPoint presentations, there are several scenarios. The chapters start with a scenario in which a case of positive externality, in this case, a case in which a beekeeper has bees, mix honey, but the bees also pollinate somebody else's orchard, and the pollination of somebody else's orchard is an externality because the orchard owner doesn't pay for the service of the bees. I don't know if you know anything about agriculture, but usually to pollinate big fields, there's not enough pollinators, insects, and so people rent bees. There's people that have bees, they put them in a truck, they put them in the middle of a field for some time, and then they pollinate the field. That's basically how that works. And so if you get a service for free without paying for it, there'll be an underproduction of it. The same thing as if you have a negative effect and the negative effect is not compensated for. Basically, you're making cigarettes, you're producing cigarettes cheaper than they should be because there is other cost that you don't care about, you don't pay for it, right? So if nobody says anything about you provoking secondhand smoke, then you keep smoking, people make cigarettes, and somebody else will get hurt, but those costs are incurred by somebody else. And so the producers of cigarettes and the consumers do not pay the full cost. And because they don't pay the full cost, the price is cheaper than it should be. The other consequences is that they should be less cigarettes, should be more expensive. Okay, and so the presentation and the chapter has all these graphs, and the graphs explain exactly what happens when you have an external cost. You start from a normal equilibrium, supply demand, and then something happens. There is an extra cost that is incurred, and this creates a problem with the supply demand model. So this is when everything works well. You can see here there is on the graph on the right, there is a little cost, an extra cost, sorry. And this is social marginal cost. That means there should be less supply. Supply moves to the left, it should be less available at a higher price. But in reality, unless something is done, usually doesn't happen. So you have this excess of production and consumption of stuff that is not good. Okay, that's because the cost incurred by somebody else. And there are many examples of that. You know, the chapter is very clear on what's happening, but environmentally, how do you, for example, calculate the cost of wildlife lost? So if there is pollution or there is environmental deterioration and then something happens and the animals die or a species get extinct, what is the cost of that? Like, how do you calculate the cost, and who should pay for that? Okay, so this is the chapter, what it's about. It's very interesting. There's a lot to it, and I think when you start reading and thinking about it, it's really an important aspect of economics, and is an important aspect of correcting failures and the reason why many things happen. And there are a lot of problems, for example, with climate change. The reason of climate change is that it's the negative consequences, the external negative consequences come very far in the future. So it took 100 years, 200 years of polluting to get the carbon at this level, and now have this turning point where the temperatures really start to go up fast. But it took a long time of concentrating carbon. And so when people started burning carbon 100 years ago, 200 years ago on the Industrial Revolution, you really didn't think about that. And so you just passed on the cost to the future, to future children, future humans. And so that's another example. When the costs are too far in the future, it's hard to tell. So now let's go to Blackboard and let's look a little bit at this thing. So when you go to Blackboard, you go again here, sorry, you're scrolling down, you go to week 9, and so that's what we cover. We cover negative, positive externalities and solutions to externalities. And now sometimes taxes, the government can reduce, how do you reduce pollution, for example, through taxes and stuff like that. And so you go here again, and then you see what you have to do. You read the chapter 11, and then you have to complete all the assignments, and then you go here. There's a list of readings and videos. Again, the readings are just for your own interest. I hope you read them because they're very interesting and not too long, and they discuss topics that relate to this week. So one is about poor and pollution. This article here discusses how there's an organization that tries to show that there are private solutions to externalities. They're very powerful and they're very pro-free market. I do not agree completely, but they have their own ideas and they're bringing their own theories. And in this one, they say that sometimes, the fact that in polluted areas, housing is cheaper, it's a good thing for poor people because they can afford housing. Like, I do not agree because in principle and ethically that's wrong, but it's a theory and whatever, they have this theory. And what else? Then there's the other one, externalities, ripple effects. This one talks about seals, the seal population. It creates a problem for salmon because salmon, there's a shortage of salmon, especially in the West. They don't go up anymore on the river, and salmon spend a long time in the sea, in the ocean, before they go up in the river to spawn. And sea lions, they eat salmon on the ocean, and because there's less salmon, the sea lions eat the salmon, and so they contribute to reducing the population. And then you have this negative effect that you go out and now they go out and kill sea lions because there are too many, and they kill salmon. So because we initially created a problem with the reduction in salmon population through dams, then they create a problem for the sea lions. You can see how this ripple effect, right? The sea lions didn't do anything wrong. They did whatever they did, but now they get killed because we already started reducing the population of salmon. That's the situation. And then there are a couple of videos here, 4 videos that will be helpful for you to understand positive and negative externalities and the role of the government, etc. Okay? And so when you go to assignments, you will find the usual for assignments. You go to week 9 and you will find all the Connect assignments. And then this week also you have a discussion board. And the discussion board, I see that somebody has already posted one, but here you can see that the discussion board asks you to discuss an example of an externality, okay, or a common resource, but you can stick to externality for this example. The point of this is you need to look of an example, positive or negative externality, find an article and discuss it. And there are plenty. So I already mentioned secondhand smoking. Then you can look into vaping. Is there an externality of vaping? Is there an externality pollution? You can think of many things. You find an article or 2 that talks about that cost, and then you want to address it. Read it, talk about it, and describe the problem, post a link to the article, and describe what the article says about what the problem is, what the possible solutions are, if there is any measurement of the cost and stuff like that. So remember, it's always important as economists, if you can put values, numerical values to something, it's really important. So try to find articles that discusses numbers, if there are numbers of that quantify the negative effect or quantify what the cost of cleaning up a polluted place would be or something like that. Okay, so that's what's due this week. And this is a cool chapter, I think, when you start growing up, and so you really start to figure out why that's important and why that needs to be considered every time we take an action. There is an economic activity. Okay, so that's it for this week. And next week is week 10, and we'll talk about the final chapter that you have to deal with and the final project that is due. And so if you have any questions about the final project, send me an email and I'll answer it as quickly as I can. Again, thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.